Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this Exchange Wales webinar. For those of you who are new to Exchange, we're a network of over 1,300 individuals and organisations across Wales and beyond, with an interest in social care. The Exchange network is hosted by the Cascade Research Centre at Cardiff University, and is now funded by the Welsh Government through the Healthcare Research Wales arm. We have a range of events, so lots of webinars at the moment, and hopefully one day again, live events, and also lots of online resources as well. So do look out for us. Today, I'm really delighted to welcome what I call Team Deep, who are with us today. We've got Nick Andrews, from Swansea University, and Fiona Verity from Swansea. We've got Rebecca Vincent-Newson and Kate Howson from Social Care Wales, and we have Jill from Bangor University. So it's great we have a spread across Wales for this event. It's lovely. We are recording this session, so if you happen to have to leave early or you lose connection, it will be on the Cascade website soon, and I'll email you when it's available. And today, because we can't see our participants, if you want to ask a question at all or respond to something that Nick, Rebecca and Fiona put to you, if you want to say it out loud, please just pop a Q into the chat box. Or if you don't want to say it, and we can switch on your mic then when it's question time, we'll switch on your mic so you can ask the question. Or if you don't want to say it out loud, please just write the question in the chat box and one of us will read it out for you. So with that, I would like to hand over to Rebecca, who's going to make a start. So if the rest of us panelists could go on to silent, and then Rebecca will share her screen. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sian. I am hopefully sharing my screen, so can someone give me a thumbs up and let me know if I am? Brilliant. Okay, so my name's Reb Vincent-Newson, and I'm a social worker with a background in mental health, but I now work with Social Care Wales, and I'm in the research and data team. And Nick's asked me to spend a couple of minutes to set the scene of how DEEP fits in strategically across Wales, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of background, hopefully not more than 5 minutes. Well, you'll probably be familiar with Social Care Wales as the organisation that's got responsibility for registration, regulation of social work training and fitness to practice. But one of our really important roles is improvement and development. And a newer aspect of this is to support the social care workforce to use research and evidence in practice, planning and policy making. And that's all laid out in the Social Care Research and Development Strategy that we co-own with Health and Care Research Wales. And that describes ways that we can support people working in social care to access, use, apply and generate research and evidence. So we're currently developing our approach to how we do this. And it was really important that we found out what people working in social work and social care think would support them to use research and evidence in practice, and what some of the barriers and some of the enablers are. So we asked the Social Care Institute for Excellence to support us to carry out research with local authorities, also with Welsh Government and people working in research, academia and third sector roles. And we spoke with a wide range of frontline staff as well as managers. And we took the findings of the research and we formed some working groups to help us refine themes for how we might take this work forward. Let me share my next slide with you. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I just wanted to show you what people told us was important for them with research and evidence use, some of the key themes. So people told us that it's essential that we map out what's happening in local authorities and other organisations and academic institutions in terms of research and evidence, because as you know, there's lots of good stuff going on. This is a prime example of something that is. Practitioners and researchers are doing great stuff every day, but there's no clear picture of how it all fits together and could be joined up. So we've now got an evidence and engagement coordinator who's connecting with all 22 local authorities, academics, researchers, third sector and user-led organisations to find out what people, structures and processes are already in place to forge stronger links, to widen out the collaboration and see what we can do to encourage and support further development. Central digital resource. Well, people told us they want access to formal research, evidence summaries, finding out what research projects are going on in Wales, and an opportunity for digital networking and collaboration. As we know, there are a lot of good online options out there, again, that we could signpost to. So we're exploring options there. Research confidence came up. Practitioners told us that they want to gain specialist knowledge via the new post-qualification framework and ongoing training and development. And they want to develop their confidence with appraising, applying, and doing research. So in other words, feeling and being research confident. In terms of leadership and learning cultures, people told us that they need leadership support to engage with evidence and be given the time to engage with evidence, and that we need to support leaders, excuse me, to give them the tools to help create a research-minded culture. And research capacity building, we know that people don't always know what the options are for doing their own practice research or doing postgraduate study. So ensuring those pathways and opportunities are clear and are available equitably. And we heard that people think that the role of research champion could be a really helpful way of linking up the social care workforce and academia, and could play a really important role in realising that aim of evidence-enriched practice and practice-enriched research becoming a reality. So, as we take these 4 themes forward and build our approach to supporting the workforce to use evidence even more widely than you already do, and just bringing that research strategy to life, these are the ways that we're going to be partnering with DEEP to make it a sustainable approach. So looking at leadership, culture change and the PQ framework, development has already started on what we're calling the DEEP curriculum. My colleague Kate is working with Nick, Jill and Fiona on this, and I know they'll be talking about this later. But that's really about supporting leaders to create enriched environments for learning, giving people skills to gather, appraise and present evidence, and also gaining and refining skills on how to talk and to learn well together using evidence and putting learning into action. And what we want to do is to embed this DEEP curriculum into existing training and development opportunities wherever possible. So for instance, things like the team manager development programme, the new PQ framework and so on. And really just being mindful that people told us in our research that please don't reinvent the wheel, align wherever you can and embed those DEEP approaches into existing learning and development opportunities. And in the same way, we're collaborating with DEEP so that any resources that are developed can go online and be made available for people to learn from and use wherever possible. So the other way that we're embedding DEEP approaches strategically is by using the approaches in our improvement programmes. So as Social Care Wales, we have national programmes of work such as a focus on care and support at home, community resilience, people living with dementia and children who are looked after. Nick, I know, is going to share much more of this later, but we're using those approaches in our work already, which is there to support the whole of the social care workforce across Wales. And I think for us, one of the key reasons why we're developing links with DEEP is the approach's commitment to recognising diverse types of evidence, and particularly the wisdom of practitioners and the voices of people who use care and support. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that's given a little bit of a backdrop to strategic approaches to DEEP. And I'm going to hand over to Nick now to give us some more detail.
We stop sharing screen and then
stop sharing.
Great. Okay. For the next little session, I'm just going to explain some of the principles and the essence of what is DEEP, because people say, what is the developing evidence-enriched practice approach? I'm going to pose a question to you after that, and then Fiona's going to go into more detail about the actual work programme and invite you to come and be involved with us in that. So I'm going to share my, if you want to look at the background, it came out of a research project initially with Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which Sian kindly sent us as a blog. I think you all had a blog in the flyer and the paper. If anybody wants the paper, let me know and I can send it. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Is that coming up? Can you all see that? Slides. Is that clear? Yay. It's really hard to walk into an empty wall, isn't it? So if I start to have the fit of the giggles, apologies. Right. So it's using evidence to make the world a better place, because that's what it's about. It's not about being clever. We really want, and this little picture here is an example from Hoosway. It's a dementia service in the Netherlands, where they've used evidence about what matters to older people and staff, and they've created a really human-centered dementia environment. So it's not about being clever. This is about working collectively to make the world a better place. So I want to start really because it starts with this idea of saga. I call it the saga of evidence-based practice, because people often talk about, oh, we must do evidence-based stuff. Well, a lot of the research around so-called evidence-based, which means starting with research and then just implementing it and putting it into practice, is fraught with difficulties, and a lot of money has been spent on it, and it doesn't always bear on fruit. So this idea that it's a bit like the engineer brains, the researchers are the clever people who come up with some wonderful facts and knowledge, and then they send it out to the masses and say, here are my recommendations, and then you're supposed to follow them. And of course that doesn't work, because context is everything, and the only people who understand context are the people living in services or being supported by services, and you've got to engage with them too. So that's why we use the word evidence-enriched. We bring research evidence into things that are already got something good in them already. We enrich things, we don't tell people what to do. So, and this relates to Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan, who, I think, why am I talking about Franciscan, but I love this quote. He basically says, the Achilles heel of so much organized religion is that we tend to teach people what to see rather than how to see. And the research community can be a bit like that. We come up with our ideas, our knowledge, and then we sort of impose it on people rather than help people to explore and contextualize our knowledge. So that's what really, we don't want to tell people what to do. We want to sow seeds for people to engage in dialogue, really. So, and it really fits with a model called social pedagogy, which some of you, particularly working in children's social work, might know, which is it's a very deeply relational way of sharing knowledge that values people intrinsically from the start, really. So we can't do anything if we don't respect the people. We cannot educate if we don't start, and I said start and not stay, from the levels in which the people perceive themselves, their relationships with others, and with reality, because this is precisely what makes their knowledge. One of the tasks of the educator is to promote the discovery of need for knowing, and never to impose the knowledge whose need was not yet perceived. So basically, social pedagogy says if you're any kind of learning environment, the people involved have already got their own knowledge, and that's precious. They're all diamonds, really. The idea is everyone's a diamond. Then people aren't empty vessels. And I do think sometimes the research community sees people as empty vessels that we have to give stuff to. And the other thing that's really important in social care, it's a highly contextualized service. It's not like making a car, working in a factory. You're working with people. So sometimes it's not about applying things the same every time. It's working in context. And there's a psychologist in the States called Barry Schwartz who compares good social workers and social care workers to jazz musicians. They have a few notes, but they play around with them according to the context. So and this is really important. If you get somebody who takes a piece of research and then tries to shoehorn it in the same way every time, it often causes more harm than good. You've got to be able to contextualize and apply different types of knowledge in context. And I'd encourage people to look at this talk by Barry. It's great. And this idea of wise practice. The other thing that's really important, element of the deep approach, is how if we want people to engage with knowledge or evidence or whatever, then the best way to do that is through story. We're storytelling animals. So for example, here in this slide, from the Joseph Roundtree project work I was involved in, here's a piece of research. It says often it's the simple things that bring the most pleasure, and the lack of them can bring a sense of sadness and loss. And services do not always seem to be very good at delivering the ordinary. Now that's a research finding. And I could share that with you, and you say, well, I get that, it makes a bit of sense. But what happens is things like that, they tend to go in one ear and out the other. What we found in our research is that you need an emotional hook with knowledge, not just the intellectual stuff. You need something that captures an emotion, and stories do that. So I want to give an example of this, this research message in a story. And this is Carol on the right of the picture, who lived in a nursing home in Monmouth, and she was involved with us in the research. And she had a story about this research message. And she said, I'll tell you what my story is. She said, when I was living in the community, I felt like I had a life. Now I'm living in the nursing home, I'm just existing. She said, when I was living in the community, I I used to get a taxi on a Friday down to Waitrose, and I'd buy myself a Hester Blumenthal prawn cocktail. Cost £2.34, and she said it was my little Friday treat. And she says, now I'm in the nursing home, I don't get the prawn cocktail. So that's really powerful, isn't it? It's a poignant story. But of course, we shared this story with the staff, and they got the story straight away, much more than they'd have got that research message. They got the narrative, and they had a dialogue with Carolyn. Of course, they came up with a solution. They got her mini fridge, and she has a prawn cocktail on a Friday, a Rolo dessert on a Wednesday. But I just want to show you that if you want to share research or any kind of evidence in your servicing team, story is one of the most powerful ways to do it. How do we turn research into stories is one of the things we're looking at. Yeah. Another important thing is what we call the top trumps in decision making, because this is the other thing. Is a quote from our project. In the multidisciplinary team, I said, I've spoken with the occupational therapist, and we think, this is a social worker, sorry. The nurse responded by saying, well, I've spoken with the consultant physician, and she thinks. So it's this top trumps in decision making, and that's not very good, is it, when you're trying to use knowledge? So you have this lovely quote from Hodgson and Canvin. It goes back a while now. What counts as knowledge, and whose knowledge counts? So if you're trying to contextualize knowledge, and you've got a researcher in a room, and you've got a practitioner, and you've got somebody with dementia, and you've got a manager, whose knowledge counts? Is it the researcher? Does the researcher play the top trump, or is it the practitioner? And you'll have the same thing when you're making best interest decisions. Whose knowledge is the top trump? And what we want is say, if we value different types of knowledge, we've got to get away from top trumps. We've got to listen to the different types of knowledge. And sometimes they don't always agree, because that's the important thing. Research doesn't always agree with practice, and practice, and that's not a problem. Let's explore that rather than just disagree. So what is DEEP? The DEEP approach. It's an approach to exploring using evidence that draws on associated principles and methods. So, and we're very clear about that. And our curriculum is trying to make that more explicit. And this is really important. It's as much a way of being as a way of doing it. That's where it comes from, this social pedagogy background. There's an authenticness about it around valuing people as precious, and valuing people's knowledge as precious, whether they're researchers or people supported by services or practitioners or managers. So it's about humanity. So it's focusing on making the world a better place, not just about being clever. And it's about valuing and appreciating all sorts of people and their diverse types of knowledge. Reb said that. She talks about research and evidence. Well, we think research is just one type of evidence. We see evidence as an umbrella term for diverse types of knowledge, and research is one type of knowledge. We also, DEEP is much about sharing stories. We believe strongly in the power of story, talking and thinking well together, which develops relationships, a common language and context. It's not like briefing sessions. This is relational. We try to create relationships. So the people I work with, we tend to think of ourselves as a community, the DEEP community, really. And it's around collective learning and experimentation. So I hope that makes sense. So there are 5 sort of key principles to DEEP, which the paper explains in more detail. But I love this quote. It shows my age now. This is Joni Mitchell, because it starts with a garden. I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, where are you going? And he told me, I'm going down to Yazga's farm. I'm going to join in a rock and roll band. I'm going to camp out on the land. I'm going to try and get my soul free. We are stardust. We are golden. And we've got to get ourselves back into the garden. And so this was Woodstock, wasn't it, in the late 60s? It was around people had lost the humanity, seemed to be out of the system, and it's about coming back to what it means to be human. And this is really, I'm really pleased. There's lots of work now saying that we've got to go back to making social services more human, less process driven. And one of the things I like to illustrate this is the story of Wallace and Gromit. You know, it's the Shaun the Sheep one, the close shave, isn't it? Gwendoline has a wool shop, and she has this dog called Preston, who was designed by her daddy, and he used to go around at the sheep so you could gather the wool. And it's a really benevolent dog, but it malfunctions and it starts rounding up the sheep and turning them into dog meat. And that's the story, isn't it? It's terrible. And she says this lovely line in the film, Daddy created him for good, but he's turned out evil. And then we share this sometimes with people in social services, and social workers say, yes, I think that's true. It's become, I didn't come into social services to fill in all these forms, do all this bureaucracy. And carers and people in supportive services say, it's not very relational. I don't know I see one person, then I see another person. And if I need anybody, I have to go back to a call center. We've sort of dehumanized it, and we've focused so much over the last 20 years on making it a system and processes and referrals and KPIs. And I'm reminded of T.S. Eliot in his poem, Choruses from the Rock. They constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that nobody needs to be good. You see, we can't have that, can we? We've got to get back to humanity, and that's what we believe in. Because when you get back to humanity, people are transformed by humanity. I won't go into detail here, but this is Greg Boyle, who's works with marginalized gang members in the Los Angeles, and he transforms their lives. And I love this quote by him: only the soul who ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of change in the world. So, and it's the same with knowledge. If you create an environment where people feel loved and appreciate and value, whether you're a social worker, care worker, or somebody supported by services, then you're open to learning. You want, because people want to make the world a better place. So there's lots of stuff, and I won't go into it, around kindness in public services and creating kind teams and kind local authorities and kind services and kind performance frameworks from the local Welsh government. But you get the gist. That's the most important thing, I think. Mike Nolan says you've got to create this environment where everyone feels safe. Everyone has some kind of continuity. So if you're involved in change, you bring through some of the good stuff from the past, that you have a sense of belonging, that you have a sense of purpose, a sense of achievement and significance, that you matter because of who you are. I really labour this. This is the most important thing about DEEP, because I think once you create that environment, people are open to all sorts of knowledge, whether it's research knowledge or whatever. So what is evidence? It is research findings, it's lived experience, it's practitioner knowledge, it's organizational knowledge of managers, and it's bringing all of those knowledges together and respecting them, not demonizing any of them or dismissing any of them, saying we're going to learn collectively. So before, how do you gather and present? Because this is the thing, we think sometimes you've got to present things properly, and we don't always do that. Research are famous, aren't they, at giving it totally dense academic papers that are unintelligible, really. They might say something good, but nobody can understand them. So I'll just give a couple of examples here. Here's a research message. Here, we all need to make the effort to see and hear the individual behind the label diagnosis, taking into account the increasing diversity of older people as a demographic group. It's a bit jargony, isn't it? And when we found we were sharing these jargony research findings with practitioners, they didn't really quite get them. What we found is when we turn them into stories, these magic moments we often use, people get them straight away. So there's something around, if you're going to present any kind of evidence, make it interesting, make it human. And then when you work together, talk and think well together. This is so important, and we've been developing training in this, so helping people to talk and think well together, which we like to do, but we don't always do it well, especially if you've got a bunch of extroverts with a few introverts, and introverts don't get a word in, really. They've got a lot to say. But so we do a lot of work around using some practical techniques, which we train people in. We use a thing called community of inquiry or exploratory talk, or magic moments, tragic moments, action learning, approaches to action learning, and the thing we call most significant change. So these are just some examples I can give you, but they're really practical ways of getting groups of people with different perspectives to talk and think together. So where we used it in practice, going right back into our early project, one of my favorite stories, I won't go into detail, but I can share, is how we looked at relationship-centered practice and how we worked with one organization which ended up in changing professional boundaries, because all the research said that relationships matter in care, but the organizational knowledge said we have professional boundaries and staff can't be friends with residents and all this sort of stuff. So we explored that. We didn't judge anyone, but we explored all the different perspectives. But as a result, this organization changed its professional boundaries policy and worked towards a more relational way of working where people could share lives. The other one, more recently, we've been working in West Wales, is around refreshing respite, where we started with research just as a stimulus to get carers to share their stories and their experiences. So we use the research knowledge to then generate or to catalyse local knowledge from carers. And then we brought carers with practitioners, and these layers of knowledge and sharing stories and talking and thinking, they developed a set of principles for remodelling their respite care services. And I'm working with Jill and others at the moment on a different way of doing respite, which is more normal around short breaks and more people-centered, really. So that's just a couple of examples. So that's my little bit, and I just thought, because it's a lot of talking. So in the chat now, and hopefully Sian's going to help us with this. I wanted you to share, have a think now what I've shared, and think what struck you most about what was it shared. And again, in the spirit of DEEP, I don't want you to say, oh, it's marvellous. I want you to say, oh, we like that, I disliked that, or that was really understandable, or that was gobbledygook. that seems relevant. That's totally irrelevant to my work. That sounds practical, or that sounds impractical. Do you get the gist? So I really want to think I'd love to, and we would love your thoughts. Hopefully Sean's going to share these with us, because we want to be authentic, really, and sensible and down to earth. And if anything I've shared doesn't make sense, then we need to know. So is that okay, Sean? Can you, if I stop sharing now, can you give us a, say, 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes of chat?
Hi. I'm not
Hello.
sure if I got that question, but I just wanted really to tell you something that I really like. Building relationship with service user, boundaries, changing policy. I love that.
Oh, good.
So that makes sense, because we are kind of bound. Oh, we are social worker. We shouldn't really build. We have professional relationship, but where that line sometimes it's crossed. We believe it's crossed, but actually, in my personal view as a professional, it's not. We should really go deeper into relationship and find out what these young people think. I work in a company as asylum-seeking children, and I'm dreaming to retire to listen to their story. Why should I wait to retire and not to have professional relationship to really hear their story?
Yeah, there's a nice bit of research on that, and it's a guy called, I've forgotten his first name, but Firand, he's a Finnish guy, and he says that people don't want to be over-benefited. Mental well-being is linked to neither being over-benefited or under-benefited. So if you're just receiving from someone and not being able to give back, then that's undoes your well-being. And the same if you're giving out all the time and not receiving. So I think these give and take relationships are so important in social work. It's what can, and yeah, I know in older people's services, older people often think, what can I do for the staff, not just what can the staff do for me? And I'm sure that's the same. I worked in children's home, and the kids seemed happiest when they could do things to help me.
Yeah, thank you.
Samantha Hall, I think we just create an environment where social workers are valued. Exactly, yeah, very much so. That's hard, because once people are valued, I think we're intrinsically created. We're motivated to work collectively to make the world a better place. That's how we've evolved, really. And so if we create those environments, those enriched environments, then you're on a winner to engaging with evidence. Relational and developmental trauma is only repaired by positive relationships. Yeah. Everything's relational. Knowledge shared, learning is relational. Social work is relational. Well said. Fiona's thinking. Have you got anything to say, Fiona? Well, you're muted. Sorry.
I was just going to say hello. I'm Fiona Verishi, and social work background as well, but working at Swansea University now. But I was just going to say something, Nick. Do you want to? Because part of what DEEP does too is generate research questions, doesn't it, from practice? So that one about boundaries. So part of it is also generating what do we need to understand more of to overcome some of these barriers and obstacles. But you want to talk about that, because that's led to research coming up from practice.
Well, it has. I mean, again, probably the nicest example of that is the short breaks work, where people were sharing knowledge about what matters to carers from research and also from their own experience and what's available as respite. And there were gaps in knowledge. So basically, we linked up with CADA, Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research, and a range of organisations in other parts of the UK to set up a research and practice development group. It's called the Short Breaks. And we are exploring the gaps in knowledge. So how do we develop better respite? And so not only are we pulling in evidence examples from different places and from research, but there's a gap in the knowledge. What is effective? What are good outcomes? So that's a nice example, and we're keen to do that in other areas too. So it's only when you explore a thing you find the gaps, don't you? And you think, well, how do we get around that? And what's the new knowledge that we need to know? So I think there is a link, and Jill is leading on that work. Jill, do you want to say about research development?
I've not got much to add to what you've just said, Nick. The only thing I would add is that another stream of our work with the research community is trying to link the researchers who have knowledge they want to share in with the right practice groups for discussion and dialogue. So it's like Nick said, let's kind of just presenting their knowledge, but more a way of enabling them to have conversations about their work with people that can start to contextualize it and actually get it implemented in a meaningful way.
I'm just looking, so I'm just getting my head around the chat box now, and I've just seen some different things. Like Samantha said, Samantha Hall, around creating space into the skills of space to engage with this work. That is so important to create space, isn't it? What we found in when we were doing the original project, we only had 2 hours once a month, I think it was 2 hours once a month, and we had service users, carers, practitioners, managers. We got together and we had nice tea and cake together, and people said, we so enjoy this, we so value this. It's only 2 hours, but it's so valuable. And Julie Boothroyd, I always quote Julie because she's living in Monmouthshire, because some authorities say we haven't got time to meet, we're too busy, and she says we haven't got time not to meet, because she's involved in transformation of social services, and she says that talking together is so important. So thank you for sharing that, Samantha. What have we got? Use of language. Yeah, well, language is so important, isn't it? Yeah, so and getting not just language, to me, it's this word, again, jargony word, semantics. It's understanding what's behind the language. So a nice example of that, Diane, is when we do most significant change techniques. So that's an approach to evaluating, but it's designed to create a common language and a common understanding around something. So in West Wales, they were looking at prevention and well-being. Well, of course, what's that? Everybody's doing different things. Health are doing things, third sector doing things, social workers are doing things. So we used most significant change, which gathers stories from their own perception of what's prevention and well-being and their own narratives. And then we get those stories and get a group of people who are the decision makers to talk about the stories and decide which is the most significant story. So they start to understand what's going on in the stories. So that common language thing is one of the central things of DEEP, because once we've got a common language, then it affects the way we think and the way we act, and we're all working together on the same hymn sheet. So that's really good.
Let me give you a break to have a drink, Nick.
Yep.
So, yeah, the next comment we have here is from Donna. Working in early help year within social services, and it's becoming more process work-led. So this is great to hear. I've used pen pictures for years, and there has been a shift away from it instead of towards it. So I will be interested in moving to more relational work.
Donna, I'm sorry to hear that, because actually I've been working with Social Care Wales on developing guidance for outcome-focused recording, and we've basically, and that's Social Care Wales guidance, and we've got buy-in with CIW as well, and it's all saying that those pen pictures and the personal and first word, case notes in first person words, not in interpreted words, is really important. So I'd encourage people it's called Friend Not Foe, the guidance. I think it's out for consultation at the moment with Social Care Wales, but that is sad because the pen pictures are so powerful, aren't they?
And then we've got another comment here from James Thomas, and perhaps after you've commented on James's question, we could then move on to Fiona perhaps after that, so we keep to time. Yeah. So James says, although as usual I thoroughly endorse Nick's presentation, I need to ask what is different. I have been attempting to engender the philosophy of the recovery approach into mental health services, which includes listening to individual stories. However, the professional's view is supported by much of management, is that recovery does not work. How do you anticipate DEEP getting sign up for DEEP?
Well, I'd encourage straight away that, James. That's one of our techniques called community of inquiry is specifically designed around that, because basically it's non-directive, but it's very structured, and it encourages basically how I'm going to go into just a few minutes. Basically what you do is you present an idea, some knowledge. So say here's some research about recovery, or here's the whole thing about recovery. This is what recovery says. Then instead of saying it's marvelous, isn't it, and you're all going to do it, a community of inquiry would get people. It has these ground rules where basically anybody can say what they like about the subject. They might like it, they might dislike it, but they must always have a reason. So what you do is you get people individually to reflect on what's being presented. And you say, you might think this is the best thing since sliced bread. You might think it's a load of baloney. It's fine. It's fine. Just say. And then you get people then from individual reflection into pairs. Then you get them into small groups. And then we get people to generate questions that are common, central, connected, and contestable about the whole subject. I mean, I'm trying to do it in 1 minute, which is, we do training on this, but basically you generate questions and you encourage people to disagree and you explore together. But what we find is through that process, people who might have been resistant start to understand other people's perspectives and then are more open to new ideas. So the community of inquiry is the perfect thing to explore a contentious subject area, because it's designed, that's what it loves. It loves the idea that people disagree, but it does it in a constructive way rather than a I'm right, you're wrong sort of way. Does that probably doesn't make sense, but I'm happy to talk further about community of inquiry.
It does, Nick. Could I just add to your answer? I just want to pick up on James's last point about how do you anticipate getting sign up for DEEP, and that's a very valid point, James. I think our answer would be that we're hoping to work strategically, and Fiona will actually touch on this in just a minute, with our work programs that work with key organisations like Health and Care Research Wales and Social Care Wales. So kind of getting things embedded in a strategic way, as well as continuing to work and embody our approach in the way we work with everyone. And as you say, this isn't reinventing something. It's not a brand new philosophy. It's a really sound and probably an approach that is very intuitive to lots of people working in the sector. So it's trying to build on what is kind of already intuitively known and support it.
From a strategic example, I'd point to Rhonda Cunningham, because Sian Noel, Head of Adult Services, she got all of the senior managers in her team to train in community of inquiry, because they're using the approach, and she's approached me now again, and I've got to do some work with some of them. So they are trying to, because they want to do co-production there, and of course community of inquiry is a brilliant tool for co-production, because whether it's co-production with your staff or the people you work with. So so again, if you send me an email, I can always link up and show you examples of where people have used the technique, and across Wales, really, in different places.
Can I give an answer as well to James's question? Because I think personally, I think you're spot on, because in a way, as Jill said, these ideas, they don't come from nowhere. There's trace elements kind of across the 20th century of different philosophers and movements, and it's in social work going back to its kind of beginning and its roots. But I think we can't underestimate managerialism, kind of new forms of managerialism that keep evolving, kind of paperwork, risk management, kind of insurance pressures. I think that's just, there's so much of that, and that keeps moving and growing as well. So in a way, I think we've kind of got this kind of competing narratives that are there, and I think that's just part of the landscape in which we're working. And what we're trying to do with this deep work is actually, we're very cognizant of that kind of landscape and what it means for social workers and people who use services and people in communities, but how we actually create those environments and work with others to create them is part of our quest. Great, thanks, Nick. Hello to everyone. So yeah, my name's Fiona Verish and I'm part of the DEEP team, and I've got a community development social work background. So I just want to take you through briefly what it is that we're going to be doing over the next 2.5 years. And I think for me, kind of picking up on what James was saying in his question, if I've interpreted the question right, James, is just how are we going to kind of get support for the DEEP program, and that is very much what we're trying to do, or what we're going to be doing over the next 2.5 years. So we're funded by Health and Care Research Wales, and we're funded to expand the work of DEEP. So the last 5 years, we've had the DEEP program, and that was under the auspice of the Wales School for Social Care Research, primarily kind of headed by Nick, and now Nick's been joined by Jill and me and others. So we're going to be working across Wales and focused very firmly on how do we spread DEEP, how do we deepen DEEP, how do we engage DEEP across more local authorities than we have in the last 5 years, but working also with the third sector, community development organisations, social care practitioners, public kind of, community organisations. So we're going to work more across Wales, we're going to deepen our work, and what we want to do, our funding will end at the end of 2.5 years. And what our ambition is that we've kind of left a really kind of indelible mark on the environments, social care environments across Wales, where the DEEP approach and principles have kind of infiltrated somewhat into the infrastructure. And working very much in partnership with Social Care Wales, with Welsh Government local authorities, and so on. So just to go back to something Nick said, so DEEP is very organic and it's emergent and it's responsive and very much kind of a community development project. So that spirit and energy will come forward in the work that we're doing. So slide change. Yep. Okay, so we're going to be working in 4 areas of work, plus running across everything is a parallel evaluation. And I'm going to come to the evaluation at the end. Now, I'm very conscious that we're just going to be giving kind of headlines really in terms of what it is that we're going to be doing. So please do get in touch with us if there's things where you see there's openings for us to come and work with you, or things that you think we should be doing more of. So the first area we're working in is supporting social care learning and development work. So effectively, this is doing the DEEP work in practice. So even though we've got this role to embed DEEP and kind of spread it out across Wales, a lot of what we'll be doing is actually doing DEEP work. So training people in DEEP methods, looking at applying those DEEP approaches, so the DEEP principles and approaches and tools and techniques in agencies with issues, with community groups. So supporting people engage with evidence in their learning and development. So it might well be that somebody's got a kind of burning issue in their sector, in their practice. We can work with them in terms of how do you pull together practitioner knowledge, organisational knowledge, research evidence, lived experience, wise lived experience. How do you pull that all together and get that kind of dialogical process going? So we'll be doing that work, doing that with Social Care Wales, as I said, and with our partners. And through that as well, you don't want to be disconnected from the practice of doing DEEP. So through doing that, we'll also be learning more about what we can do to support the approach to using diverse evidences in practice. So next slide. Okay, the other one that we'll be doing, so this is a really kind of substantial piece of work, and Reb alluded to it, is we're going to be developing training modules and learning programs, and they'll be focused in particular areas. So we've started work with Social Care Wales to develop a DEEP curriculum. So Reb talked briefly about that, but the current curriculum that we've developed, and that'll be kind of open for consultation, is the first part of it is what do we do to develop those right environments for learning and leadership for learning? So being very mindful of the sort of organisational pressures and impediments for this sort of approach to really live. So what do we have to do to create those environments? So looking at social pedagogy, the principles of social pedagogy, how do you animate social pedagogy within organisational contexts? How do you engender and support creative, open, kind of wise, humane leadership for learning that really does allow for diverse knowledges to come into play and to inform practice? More on the census framework. So Nick referred to Mike Nolan's census framework. So there's been tools developed about how do you put those census frameworks into practice. Developing reflective exercises on organisational factors. So, for example, there's a lot of talk across the planet about innovation. So organisations needing to innovate, I can't even say it. So how do you actually manage the tensions of particular kind of agendas for innovation with other ideas about innovation? Do we always need to innovate? What does it mean to innovate? Why can't things be good, or why can't we do things that we've done in the past? So looking at reflective exercises about how to kind of deal with tensions that are generated through kind of contemporary drives like innovation. And how do you have environment? So you can talk about wisdom, you can talk about virtues, you can talk about values. That sounds great, but how do you actually put that into your organisational systems, practices, processes, cultures, and kind of really entrench it, as it were? So there'll be a whole set of things in the curriculum, in the module around that. The second one that Nick talked about was gathering and appraising and presenting evidence. So that is, again, as Nick said, it's really important. So in that part of the curriculum, that module, we'll be looking at a concept called knowledge democracy. And it is kind of what it says on the tin, but how do you actually get a scenario within organisations where different sorts of evidence can be presented in different ways that's accessible? And a lot of that will draw on the techniques that we've developed over the last 5 years and refined. But because we're going to be doing deep in practice, more of these techniques and learnings will come up through practice. And then the third part of it is about practical techniques. So deep, over the last 5 years, we've consolidated our understanding about most significant change, how you develop magic moments and tragic moments, how you do community of inquiry. So we'll be putting together short courses and training packages on each of those particular techniques and others that we come to understand will be useful. So next slide. Okay. The other thing is we need to find ways of getting this information out and about. So there'll be the curriculum and there'll be training opportunities and courses, and we'll be reflecting on the best way of doing them as we go through. We're also going to be putting online, so DEEP will have a website. We'll be putting online resources about DEEP principles, so not only the principles and what they are, but the informing theoretical and philosophical kind of source material, as it were, and then the techniques. And most of the techniques that we've used in DEEP, they come from somewhere. So we'll be looking at the genesis of where they come from, so people have the kind of evidence base for these techniques. It's really important to us that these resources, anything that we produce, anything that we present, particularly things that are online, that are accessible and relevant. So we're going to need people's feedback as we go about how accessible they are and how accessible do they need to be and how do we need to present the material. We'll be hosting a specific web resource to support the social services performance and improvement framework. So we finished that work end of last year. We were funded by Welsh Government to do that. So we've got quite a comprehensive set of resources. We've kind of trawled the planet to look for them, and we'll be putting them up on the website. And that will be free of charge. So there'll be no charge for anything that we produce. So that'll be live fairly soon, but I should put a caveat on that. It'll be definitely the end of February. There'll be that resource, and the resources that we develop about DEEP and its techniques will intersect with that online resource, so it will be all kind of coordinated. The other thing we want to do is, we know that we've connected with people across Wales over the last 5 years, but we want to develop a stakeholder collaborator network across Wales. And share updates, because people are doing fantastic stuff all over Wales using these techniques and using their own techniques. And we want to learn from what the wise practice people are currently doing, and learn from that. So we'll be having these stakeholder networks across Wales, and we'd really be keen to hear from people about how do we do them and how do you best participate in those. So next slide. Okay, building bridges with research. So we, as Nick said, research, academic research, empirical research, theoretical research is part of evidence. So it's one part of the four kind of hearts that go together to beat in terms of knowledge. So we will be playing a role, and we did that through the Wales School for Social Care Research, of supporting people build links with research. So it might well be that you're doing research in community development in a particular locality, and you want to connect up with people who have been doing research, academic research in that area. So we'll be supporting people make those links and bridges to academic researchers, not just Wales, but in the UK and internationally. So we'll be doing that. We're also going to be working with supporting people link up with research networks. So Cascade, who are hosting this webinar, are funded by Health and Care Research Wales, doing research in children and family issues, as you well know. So you probably don't need connecting with them, but there's all sorts of other research groups across Wales. So there's a Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research. There's an Institute for Ageing, Creative Industries and Ageing, all sorts of things. So part of our job will be to keep abreast with what these research institutes are doing and support practitioners and members of the public and third sector organisations, policymakers, connect up with those institutes and broker connections. The other thing that we'll be doing is hosting research and development networks. So it may well be that people have got fantastic ideas about where there are research gaps or puzzles or things that they're curious of knowing more about. So we'll be pulling together research and development networks, and they're connections of people from practice, from the public, from policy and from research, who get together to think about what knowledge is there, how do we draw it into practice, how do we present it, but also what new knowledge might need to be generated. And that will be supporting those networks to seek funding for research projects as they are kind of worked up. Just some examples of current networks we've got. So we're working with a Small is Beautiful research network, which is one of those research and development networks. And that's doing work in the area of community development, community co-ops, kind of social enterprises. And another research and development network around short breaks, which is also looking at respite short breaks, but linking with tourism and the tourism sector. So the final slide is just one about evaluation. So all the way through what we're doing, we'll be evaluating what we do. We want to know about the impact of our program at that program level, but the impact of these techniques, can we refine them? Can we improve them? The impact of DEEP on practice and on that kind of, I suppose, bigger quest of drawing in a richer range of diverse knowledge into social care policy and practice across Wales. We've developed an outcomes map, which we did in a participatory way with people from the sector and from academics across the UK. So more about that will be available as we go through. So I'm going to leave it there, but I think the next slide is a question. And we're just really keen, this is a chat question, whether you're interested in engaging with us and the DEEP program over the next 2.5 years, and if so, in what way? So we'd be really keen to hear from you if there's things that could be put into the chat facility. So thank you for that. I don't know if my colleagues want to say anything.
No, it's a good summary. Well done. Great.
Can we answer the question about the short breaks?
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, if Alex,
that's a really important piece of work.
Yeah, it's built up over the years, because it started with our DEEP stuff ages ago. When we did the original project with Joseph Rounds, we worked with social workers and carers and people they support in Neathport Talbot, and then we did some work in Bridgend, and then it went over to West Wales, and then North Wales are doing stuff, and now there's a big link with Scotland and even the States. So if you send us an email, Alex, we can link the person up and share our knowledge to date. I know West Wales, we worked with them on developing a review. It's called Refreshing Respite. We can share the report, so they've got permission to share that. But there is this working group, and at the moment there's some fun little bits we're looking at, because we've made a connection with the Wales Cooperative Centre, who have got a little network of people who are into community tourism. Which is really important, because the tourism industry has been really hard hit. So with all the COVID stuff. And they're saying, well, could we provide little respite opportunities, that are normal and like, not in all the, the miserableness of often respites couched in. So there's some real creative thinking going on. We're working with the All Wales Carers Forum on that. And yeah, so just send us an email and we'll link you up. Will this do this Swansea Surfing Project? Oh, I love the Swansea Surfing Project. That's great, isn't it? Yeah. And
Jane, Nick, about the magic moments.
Oh yeah, that's it. Oh, you're there, Jane. Hello, Jane. I can't see you. Yeah, well, that was a lovely example. And again, it's like appreciative inquiry. Swansea, they're lovely, aren't they? The in-house service provision in Swansea are just good, solid folk. Anyway, they to celebrate the good work they do, they gather the magic moments of staff, and then we've been working with them on how do we talk and think together about all those magic moments, and it just inspires people, and we can bring bits of research in. We did some research around risk and dementia, and with Swansea we've developed some cards, little provocative cards where you can talk about them and explore what do we mean by risk and dementia without sort of saying you're right, I'm wrong. So again, Jane, we could share that, couldn't we, if we could run a workshop with Jane, because we were hoping to, and I think in fact Jane was going to do a workshop with us at an event last March, but of course COVID stopped that. The surfing project, I think that surfing project is only down the road for me. Most sequent change would be a fantastic evaluation technique for that, because you'd get some amazing narratives out of
on
that.
The surfboards.
It would, the surfing. And I go now swimming in the sea every night. I'm sure I was inspired by the West Swansea Surfing Project. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing before people go too? If you feel that there's research questions or research that you think you'd like to be involved in or do or create, let us know as well, because that's part of our role, is to support that kind of development of research questions.
Well, the palliative care is really interesting, because we've been doing magic moments in end of life work. Again, that's with Social Care Wales and Rebecca. It was around the context of dementia, but we've done some lovely work with Hospice of the Valleys around work with all ages around using storytelling approaches to really thinking what good palliative care and end of life care look like.
That's great. So I think yeah, we've got to the end of questions and comments, but in the follow-up email I will copy in all of the panelists, so that if you do wish to ask them any questions or suggest some research questions or just feedback to them, then you'll have their emails to do that. So a very big thank you. I think we'll stop it there because it is exactly 12:30. We're spot on. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us, and you know, a huge thank you to Nick, Jill, Fiona, Reb and Kate, our panelists today, and we hope to see you again soon at another event. So
keep up the good work, everybody. Hang in.
Bye bye. Thank you. Sorry we couldn't see you. Bye bye.